Hi Łukasz, it's very nice to have you here and thanks for your time and it's a pleasure to talk with you.
Good to be here. Hello, David.
You are a keynote speaker and master of the ceremony and you have many other roles, but would you like to introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are?
As you said, I do quite a bit of emceeing or hosting conferences, about 100 a year, mostly international, sometimes debates also, and I also audit conferences. So that's one activity area of the consultancy that I run. The other activity area is training and coaching, mostly public speaking skills, and also things linked to creative and communication strategies for institutions and businesses.
So your story, I think, is very interesting because, as I said, you are a keynote speaker, master of the ceremony, also the managing director in one of the magazines who is promoting the culture of city of Krakow. But would you like to say how did you start and what drives you to become a professional public speaker?
How did it all start? I think it was a series of accidents, so probably a good word to describe all of that would be strange or quaint or peculiar, maybe interesting, hopefully, also. But I started, actually we used to have a small family business first when I was still at university. It was a sports shop, believe it or not. Right after university, I thought I would try a corporate career, which I did for 6 years. I started as assistant to the managing director of the company, of a big multinational company, multicultural, multinational. And the last of the 4 jobs I held there was director communications, director CSR, and company spokesperson. After that, I came back to Krakow for a 4-year stint at a private university teaching, mostly, which I love, and I will surely come back to that. But during this time at a private university, I started planning my own business. After 2 years, I developed a website. And then on April Fool's Day, 2015, I set up the business and I've loved it ever since.
I think that that time when you start your career as a public speaker and public speaker coach, I think that it wasn't that popular. So how did you overcome any challenges, if you had any?
I had lots of challenges. Probably you should divide challenges into 2 categories. The first category would be the challenges you feel you have inside you, preventing you from sort of taking the right steps in the right direction. And the other challenges are external challenges. For instance, one of the things that I do is conference auditing. But this doesn't even exist on the Polish market. If you Google the term, there aren't that many conference auditors because most conference organizers think the service is not even needed in most cases, which is the very opposite of what I believe as a conference MC, having studied dozens and hundreds of conferences. So I think they would benefit greatly, especially those conferences that repeat year after year and change only slightly and have a more or less fixed permanent formula. I think they would benefit greatly from having themselves audited professionally.
There will be a time to talk about the audit of the conferences because I think that this is a very interesting topic, especially for me where I had a chance to work in organizing the conferences. But before that, I'd like to ask you about the sources of knowledge. Did you use any external sources like workshop or mentors, or you try to learn everything from books or the internet?
All of it, I suppose. Formal education is one thing. The other thing is how curious you are and in how many different directions your curiosity leads you, so to say. And in today's world, you have easy access to just about every quality studying material you can think of. Lots of top global universities publish free materials, free lectures. So it's a question of being able to prioritize knowledge. Today you have access to a lot of noise, a lot of buzz, a lot of irrelevant knowledge, so to say. So it's a skill in its own right to be able to prioritize where you really learn and where you waste time. On the other hand, it shouldn't be your goal to become a robot focused entirely on, prioritizing knowledge and skills.
Looking from the time perspective, how to choose that good source of knowledge and to avoid that noise, and how to choose something good in that noise of knowledge.
I suppose the key word to your question would be focus. Discovering what we can call focus takes a while. Not all of us are born with a sense that we know exactly what we want to do in life. It takes a while to find that idea, to find that focus, to even understand what you're really good at, as opposed to what people tell you you're good at, your parents, your friends, etc. So being able to identify inside you what you might be really good at takes a while. And it's not an easy thing to find.
You mentioned about the curiosity, and I think that this is a very crucial skill in that profession. But what about the other skills?
I mentioned curiosity, but depends on what we talk about. Because if we talk about creative and communication strategies, you have very different sources of learning, and you study different strategies. You try and understand whether it's a strategy for a city or a brand or a business or a particular crisis communication situation. For all these scenarios, you basically have different sources of learning and different ways of prioritizing. But for public speaking, when I think about the Polish market of public speakers, the sad thing about it, it's really hard to find someone charismatic. It's a big word, but I think we confuse charisma. Here in Poland, I suppose it's a bit of an Eastern European inferiority complex after 1989. In the pre-1989 era, Poland was largely, in economic terms, about following the patterns of the West, so to say. You remember the power of the brand like Made in Japan. You remember, you don't remember because maybe you're too young for that. But you know what I mean.
I think that's about the charisma. There are a lot of people in the TV who are working as a public speaker, and I think that they are taking a lot of formal learnings, and their level of charisma, if I can recall this in that way, is very high. So how to develop that?
That's a tricky one, because some people believe you're either born with charisma or you have no charisma and no prospects for charisma. I'm not exactly a follower of that theory. I think you can work on your charisma. One of the great ways to study charisma is reading biographies of really interesting characters, not necessarily positive stories. So you can read the biographies of tyrants of the Second World War and you will find them hugely illuminating. And you can read the biographies of modern business leaders. Some of them would be great. I'm sure you have studied many of them.
About the role models, because I think you read, as you mentioned, a lot of biographies. So who is your role model in terms of public speaking?
I don't think I have a role model as such. I'm trying my best to be a good observer, to actually understand what is being told and to discover my own things between the lines, so to say, and compare it to other things that I read and studied and watched. The last biography that I read was Churchill's, Andrew Roberts. It's a great biography. It has not been translated to Polish yet. I hope it will be. It's an 800-page biography, but it's absolutely brilliant. I do recommend it, because from the public speaking perspective, Churchill is a very interesting character in that he was obviously a genius when it comes to public speaking. He got a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953, but even though he had a natural talent, if you like, he took a lot of time preparing, rehearsing and studying the very minutiae of what makes a great public speaker. So I think he was very, very conscious of the fact that it takes a lot of hard work in addition to talent.
What about Steve Jobs? I saw one video on your YouTube channel about him.
I think Jobs is a great example in that you can easily compare him to other business leaders of his era and even today's. Some have tried to follow in his footsteps in terms of style and maybe even charisma. But the reason why he's so interesting is that he was a disruptive innovator when it comes to presentation style of his era. I mean, if you go back to the 80s, you will see Jobs in a traditional suit, and he would look rather strange, especially from modern perspective, dressed in a traditional business style. It is only when he started dressing, the turtleneck black ones, he had several dozen of those, and casual jeans and sports shoes, and he was drinking mineral water. But the reason why he's especially interesting is, I would say, he didn't really have that many of those talents that are traditionally associated with powerful public speaking skills, in the sense that not exactly a wonderful voice to listen to, right? Not exactly the speaking style that you would associate immediately with charisma, but he had what I would describe as a subconscious instinct for developing interest in the stories that he built for his audiences. And there is even a book when you compare the way Bill Gates promoted the company's services and products to the way Steve Jobs promoted his company's products and services. The differences stand out very clearly. It's a question of how complex your sentences would be, how many academic words you use. Jobs' language was simple, straightforward, very connotative, in the sense that listening to him, you felt like being part of the conversation.
What about the business leaders? Because I think that majority of your clients who are attending your classes or personal session are the people from the top level of the management. So how to work with those people? I'm just curious about the how that cooperation with those business leaders look like from your perspective. What do you assess? Do you have any assessment for them before you start any cooperation with that people?
I do, of course. There needs to be a reason why someone decides to have a full day training in public speaking, and the reason is normally people who have high positions and who run companies, or CEOs, managing directors. They are typically associated with a strong ego and confidence, right? This is partly what got them the jobs, or to the jobs. So you would think they are typical problem solvers, in that they think they can solve all the problems themselves, especially when it comes to public speaking, because they've been presenting things and speaking to different publics their entire professional lives. And yet, there's typically some kind of reason that pushes them to look for some kind of training. And what would they be, you might ask? For instance, they are not exactly as happy as they would like to be with the response of different audiences to the way they present. So that's an impulse to start some kind of training. And once you have this, you can start a conversation.
Yeah, I'm just interested. What is the main reason that they are looking for your help? Is it the business need, or they just have this inner need that they need to develop some public speaking skills?
I've just given you a more cynical answer, and I will give you a more human-friendly, so to say, answer now. I think what defines leaders is the ability to learn continuously. So some of those people, even though they have great skills, they look for more. They seek to be better at whatever it is they do. And if they come to the conclusion that communication is one of those skills they need to sharpen, to make better, then they try to do something about it and trust their instincts. That's what they do. That's what I would do, and that's what probably you would do in their position.
But do you think that you can train everyone?
So,
in terms of public speaking,
certainly
of course.
Certainly not. I think I would never even try to coach anyone, or I wouldn't even try coaching someone I don't believe I could genuinely contribute to this person's skills. And that's part of the diagnostics. In today's world, if you're working with a leader of some kind of institution or a business, you can do a lot of research before. You can check. You can look into this person's performance on YouTube, on different websites, and you can develop an idea about strengths and weaknesses. And based on that, you can adjust the method and work on tailored training programs.
So, on the other hand, when we back to the profession as a public speaking coach, what do you think about the right moment to find the paid contracts? Because I think that many people are struggle with the situation when they are developing their skills, they are, collecting the recommendation. But do you think that there is some kind of right moment that you can go to the market and offer your help with some, in exchange for the money, instead of, just for gaining experience? Because I think that this is the very huge problem for people who are new to the market, and they are thinking about how to change it into the job instead of only passion to collect the experience.
I'm not sure I fully understood your question, but let me try and start answering it, and then you can add some extra questions. Do you remember the first time you went to a job interview and people were asking you questions? You surely do.
Yeah.
You remember the stress levels and the way you behaved and the way you answered those questions. There are different physiological reactions to it, in the sense that it can be really stressful for some people, especially straight from university. But after 5-10 years, after yet another job interview, it's much less stressful, isn't it? And actually remembering the first job interview, it makes you laugh and it makes you feel sentimental. You think, oh, I gave such stupid answers back then, such immature answers. It was all about me, myself, and I, whereas I should have done it differently. The same goes for CV documents. When you draft your first CV, you tend to write all the trivialities, all the tiny little things that the person who reads your CV will have guessed without the need to write it. But if you have a job hunter and this person spends 10-15 seconds reading your CV, it needs to be written in a way that can be read clearly in 10 to 15 seconds, because that's what this person is prepared to give you, to build the first impression. And that's how things work, I suppose. But to sort of try and answer your question from a different angle, I went through a series of coaching and training programs myself, and I was never happy with them, which is ironically enough one of the reasons why I started doing it myself. Back at university, I spent quite a lot of time analyzing speeches, especially political speeches, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, comparing presidential debates in America, studying speeches of, back then it was all about Tony Blair in Britain. So it was really interesting to see how speechwriters of top global politicians worked and thought, and comparing one presidential debate to another. And that's what I used to do at university with students, asking them to compare debates and understand the differences and actually the political purpose.
Maybe I can ask this question from the different angle, as you said, because I think that if you are the independent coach and people are looking for some kind of help in that area, they are looking for the experience. They are looking for the person who, working in that industry for the several years. My point is that,
how do I start as a novice? Is that right?
Yeah.
So you want to do public speaking coaching for a particular group of potential clients, but you don't know how to approach them, how to reach them.
Yes. And how to be, how to create this personal brand that people reach out to you instead of you reach out to the people.
Mm-hmm. So essentially what you're asking is how to become my competition.
Maybe.
Fair enough, David. I would say the tricky part is that public speaking coaching is all about trust and credibility. So the person whom you want to coach or train needs to believe that there is something meaningful or valuable that you can contribute. And this trust and credibility needs to be built somehow. It's one of those jobs where word of mouth matters a lot. So if you do it well for one client, chances are he or she will come back to you, or another company will come back to you because of how you do this job. And the beauty of public speaking coaching is that if you have gone through a number of training sessions yourself, and if you have never been happy like myself, maybe I wasn't lucky, probably I wasn't lucky enough. Or maybe because I had read a lot about public speaking before I went to those training sessions. But the thing about public speaking, if you think about it carefully, if you prepare well, is you can effectively change someone's professional career in a matter of one day. And it's not an exaggeration. So to be frank with you, after years of public speaking coaching, I thought if only I had a proper public speaking training myself at a much younger age, it would have changed my life. So that's one of the ways to answer the question.
Let's speak about the public speaking as a skill, because I think that it can be a sole job as you, but also it's important in many other jobs. So what is your opinion? What is the deciding factor that someone is a good public speaker?
There's not really a single factor, I would say, but some aspects and factors are more important than others. For instance, your analytical skills, or more precisely, observation skills. Because if you have observation skills, you will be able to improve on whatever it is you learn. But if you don't, you will reach a certain point beyond which you will never climb. So that's one of those skills. In addition to all the traditional so-called skills, of which there are dozens, like, for instance, your voice, your body language, your looks, even, depending on the context of the job. Sometimes it's important, however unfair it may sound. And all sorts of tiny little factors that need to play together.
Yeah, I think that from the perspective of the public speaking, I know about these traditional skills like body language, storytelling, how to create the presentation, how to connect with the audience. So about these skills, do you recommend something how to develop them, or you recommend any other way to develop the public speaking as a skill?
In my case, I had to make a choice because when I started emceeing conferences, I thought I need to find my own niche because the market was already quite full of MCs and hosts, because the need for MCs and hosts has been there for quite a while. So these jobs are typically associated with TV celebrities, with actors, with people who have other jobs like radio personalities or breakfast television, things like that. So these are the traditional roles. But there was a very different market as well, one of expert conferences, industry conferences, high expertise conferences, whether it's for businesses or different disciplines, where you need to do a lot of research to do a good job out of emceeing a conference. So effectively, you cannot prepare for a conference like that just driving in the car and reading out loud whatever script the organizers sent you. You need to do a much smarter job and commit a lot more time to your client and to the assignment. So this is where I started.
When you ask people about what is the main reason that they wouldn't like to speak, especially speak to others, is a stress level. So what about this? Is there any way to reduce that? I think
you're talking about a situation where people have to come out on a large stage and talk to a large audience.
Yeah,
right?
And you start sweating and your body start writing in a completely not regular way, for example.
Which is quite natural because we don't like to be criticized. We don't even like to feel that we are going to be criticized. And that's a lot of exposure. We're in the spotlight. Everyone is looking at just about every aspect of our presentation style. And it can be a literally terrifying experience. And it wasn't easy for me either. I mean, I used to be a company spokesperson and I used to talk to national television cameras. And still, when I started doing my own MC projects, it was initially very stressful, I have to say. Even though back at university, I used to do quite a bit of theatre, even in secondary school. So that should have helped me a lot. But still, it was stressful. So I suppose you should accept that stress is part of the evolution and you should come to terms with it and learn to control it to your advantage.
I read that some people, for example, doing push-ups before they go to the stage. So what about your rituals?
Well, you probably have heard the name Tony Robbins, one of the famous life coaches. I think I saw once a documentary
on Netflix.
Probably that one. I think he had his own tiny little swimming pool with cold water and ice that he jumped into just to, put his adrenaline at the right level.
And he has a trampoline.
Probably some things like that. So I suppose what it tells us, it is really idiosyncratic, very individual. Depends what works with you. I don't think I have a special routine. For me, it's more of a focus, concentration exercise. So no extraordinary tricks or magic.
If you has been invited to that conference, how your preparation looks like, or what is important, what is not important from the perspective of the host of the ceremony, or host of the conference?
Again, at least two categories. One is that clients want you or want the event to go as smoothly as possible. So smooth is one word. Whatever is meant by this word smooth, that things run without problems, because that gives them a sense of comfort, which is extremely important, because organizations, businesses, institutions usually spend huge amounts of money to invite sometimes 1,000 plus guests to the auditorium. So if you think about the tiny little factors that can mess up an event like that, the choice of an MC is certainly on top of the list, because you can have a great conference on every other front, but if you choose the wrong person, the consequences can be devastating. So it's really important. It's like not being able to start your clicker for the slides throughout the conference. That can be frustrating, can it not? So I think it takes some experience to choose the right person. Sometimes people think that the biggest value, the biggest factor that they should be focused on is a recognizable TV personality face, because that immediately raises the prestige of the event, so to say. And it's fair enough, I suppose. If you need that, if you need this factor, it can be important. And you can also find MCs who are really skilled, competent MCs and are also recognizable national level personalities. So it's doable. But I suppose if you have a more challenging type of a conference where you have multiple streams, a lot of knowledge and background knowledge that you need to familiarize yourself with, then I suppose you should go for someone who specializes in these things.
Did you have that thought on any of your conferences, that you have only one chance to make a great presentation, and you would that feeling that you need to be your best, that you have a client who paid for this and you have only one chance because the conference is live, for example. So I'm saying that because there are some biases, if I pronounce this correctly, that, for example, I have a thought that someone paid for me, so I cannot make any mistake. Or, for example, I'm thinking about what audience will think about me, and this causes some kind of stress.
David, I think that especially if you haven't done too many of those conferences, I think putting extra pressure on yourself doesn't really help the situation. There will be enough external factors to put pressure on you. If you add psychological pressures in addition to external pressures, this will put you in a really tricky situation. So I suppose you should do the opposite. You should be obviously aware of how important a given assignment is, and how important it is for you, how important it is for your future opportunities and the client. But you should not do things that put so much pressure on your brain, because otherwise it will show. People will see this pressure in you. And there are just so many ways through which people can see that you're stressed and it's uncomfortable for you to be on that stage.
So it's all about the right mindset, have the right mindset on the stage, don't think about these things.
I suppose you need to be in harmony with that job, just like any job. If someone doesn't like their job, everyone else will see it, because it shows through body language, through different reactions, through how bitter you are as a person on a daily basis. And if you love your job, everyone will see it as well. So whether we call it mindset or no mindset doesn't really matter. It's a question of finding an ecosystem, if you like, which is natural for your particular needs. It's like traveling. Some people love traveling, and they would just find every opportunity to go somewhere. They would spend time exploring new places, looking for vlogs on YouTube, just to go somewhere. And there are others who can't wait to come back home and engage in their tiny little routines, things they like, things they enjoy. And it's not a question of criticizing anyone. It's a question of understanding who you are and what you expect from life. That's it.
I'm also thinking about if you have received that negative feedback from the client about your speeches on the conference.
If I have received negative feedback from clients, I can't recall.
Lucky you.
I think I'm lucky. I maybe remember one conference where I used a joke that I wasn't particularly proud of, and I think I learned a lot from that experience. But there was only one example out of 300 conferences, and I worked with some clients over the years for several editions of their conferences. So I suppose the job gives you, and particular experiences give you a lot of humility and understanding, and you learn to be careful, But at the same time, you really need to be confident in a smart way, in the sense that what clients, customers, and the market in general appreciates is also a sense of humor. But you need to develop the right understanding of the client environment you work for.
You mentioned at the beginning about your role as an auditor of the conferences, and I think that this what client needs is also depend what kind of conference is it and what is the outcome of the conference. So your role is very unique in the Polish market, as you said. So
hopefully I didn't say that.
I thought that you said.
I wouldn't describe my role as very unique. I would describe that this job itself as a conference auditor doesn't even exist, really.
Okay.
So it's really so rare that nobody thinks about doing it seriously, because people think there is no market for that.
So what is your role on the conference? You are checking the
you're a secret guest at the conference, so you look like everyone else.
Secret client, right? In the restaurant.
Exactly. Okay. But the job is slightly more complex in the sense you need to be able to understand a lot more than the taste of coffee and the way people behave in the conference foyer, the way they walk about. You need to look into the agenda. You need to look at the entire audience and see how they respond to whatever is happening on the stage. You need to be able to advise your client on whether the actual breaks happen at the right time, and if their choice of keynote speakers is a good one or not, if you would advise something else, or if there is an extra service that you would recommend, for instance, coaching conference speakers. Again, people think that coaching a conference speaker, who by definition should be a professional conference speaker, is redundant. It shouldn't be done, because why? They should be experienced enough. But trust me, a lot of professional conference speakers would benefit greatly from some solid amount of training. The great thing about public speaking coaching is great for the client, I suppose, is that it is really sadistic and very blunt and very direct. So essentially your client will hear things about themselves that even the closest of friends would not tell them. Because of, say, friendship, diplomacy, why should I tell him, her, that? They can feel sorry if I do that. But in a public speaking training context, you do these things because otherwise there will be no positive change.
What is your definition of a good conference?
Wow, that's a really general question, David, of a really good conference. If we're talking about an industry conference, I suppose when you take the trouble to go to a physical location, a conference venue, and sometimes people travel from all over the world to spend a day or two at a conference venue, I think they should be significantly different from whatever it is people can get online. And today, I'm sure you will agree, we can get a lot online. Depends on our searching skills, essentially. But we can get a lot of valuable content on whatever discipline we choose. So conferences should be much more special. So whoever is standing on a stage, they should try and imagine that if there are 2,000 people listening to me, I shouldn't waste even 30 seconds of their time. So I think there's a lot of time wasting going on at conferences. So in the post-pandemic world, let's hope that the quality of conferences in terms of content should be more viral, if you like, in terms of... because when you think about major industry conferences, ask yourself this: how much content stays online after those conferences? How much is worthy of sharing online for others to appreciate? Even if you try to edit the best of the best out of those 2 days, how much creates this impression that this is genuinely some great knowledge, some great experience, great know-how? Not much, really, very often. So I suppose we should raise the bar for physical on-site conferences.
Pandemic changed the game when it comes to conferences, and I think that the normal conferences will be no longer that important, in my opinion, as online events. So what is your opinion about the future of events?
I think it was back in April last year when I wrote an article for a marketing magazine, and the title was Homo Eventus 2.0, which was slightly ironic in the sense in the pre-pandemic era, there were just too many of those conferences. I mean, if you had anything to do with the professional event market, you would go to a conference almost every day. There were just too many of them. And if you ask yourself how many of those conferences contributed genuine knowledge, genuine value in terms of content, the answer would be much more tricky. Definitely much fewer than you attended. So partly you will be right, I would imagine. There would be fewer on-site conferences. And even those that will be organized on-site in conference centers, they will do their best also to use the hybrid formula, in the sense that they will have a certain audience to the extent that the venue allows, but a lot more effort and work will be put into developing the online segment of the conference, because you can easily reach out to a much larger audience and you can do a much greater job using that.
I understood that that the number of conferences dramatically decreased due to the pandemic, right?
It had to. Because for a long time you couldn't safely, in the sense that it wasn't even permitted by law, to organize conferences with a large number of people in the auditorium. So yeah, for a few months, even up until now, it's much more challenging to organize typical conferences, traditional.
My point was also that people right now open their eyes about that. Maybe most of the conferences are not needed, and there is no reason to spend money on that, and it's much better to organize the online event. But there are any disadvantages of the online event that you can recall?
Sure, of course there are. Back to the first part of your question. People who spend sometimes millions on organizing a conference, I suppose they are careful deciding if they need it or not, if there are benefits or not, and they still organize those conferences. So you can probably measure before you decide if you want to spend this and this much money on a single event. So there are benefits, and even if the benefits are not entirely focused on the content on stage, a lot of the benefits are derived from the networking opportunities and being part of a herd, if you like, being part of a community interested in a given discipline. And that, it's really difficult to attach value to it. Relationship building, meeting new people. I think we want to be part of a community, and sitting in front of a computer will never ever replace that. So there will always be conferences in a traditional sense of the word. It's just that because of, even if you look at carbon footprint alone of an international conference with 2,000 guests, it's huge. So I suppose there should be a quantifiable, measurable value attached to those events, not only networking, because I'm sure you will agree, sometimes we go to conferences that in terms of content offer us next to nothing, but we are still happy after those conferences.
Because of networking, for example.
Because networking was great. Because we enjoyed the experience. And we enjoyed the experience because of the people around us and different conversations, even though whatever happened on the stage was just so poor.
And how did you find yourself in those online events?
I loved it because for the first time, surprisingly, because just like everyone, a large chunk of my calendar evaporated in March 2020, but only a month later it was already full. And what changed was I started working more internationally. I used to work internationally, but then I would travel to different countries to MC a conference. But this time I couldn't and wouldn't travel, but I MC'd conferences in just about every country in Europe for 5 months, and it was a fantastic experience, I have to say. I did like 70 conferences or 80 since March. In some countries several times, and mostly these were around technology, innovation, startups, food industry, all sorts of things.
And the last question that I would like to ask, because you are also the vlogger and you start your maybe career, maybe it will be the right word, but my question is more around the traditional media versus vloggers, because people on YouTube, for example, has the ability to generate much more audience than the traditional media. So what is the reason, in your opinion, of that? And second question is, what is the future of mass media when in terms of next generations? To
answer the first part of your question, yeah, I think I am vlogger or whatever you call it, but the problem is I still don't have enough heart to do it, which means I give it not exactly the kind of priority I would love to in the future. So that's something that I keep postponing until, I don't know, I have the right mindset, I have more time, I'm less busy with client-related projects. And about your second question, online reality and vloggers on YouTube versus traditional media, I might give you an example to explain. One thing is customizability. Again, we are very conscious viewers and we make our choices. We look for the kind of content, especially given that we have access to great streaming platforms if we're looking for entertainment or documentaries. But if we are not, we're looking for industry-specific content. We go to websites, databases, and vloggers. There are some great vloggers in just about every discipline. So, for instance, if you're interested in space exploration, like I am, because one of my clients is organizing a space conference in September. And I would go to some of the American vloggers, and they're absolutely fantastic. Is the kind of, they have, because of how fantastic they are, they also have great access to, they have direct communications with company like SpaceX and NASA, and they get special access to very interesting video content. But to give you a very clear example about the differences, the list of international vloggers who have more than 10 million subscribers is already quite huge. Definitely more than 100, maybe as many as 300. I haven't checked. But just imagine 10 million subscribers, which means effectively that every time they post something, you get a notification. So it's not like television. You don't get any notifications, do you? And that's a very tailored audience, the audience that chooses to watch your content. In that, it's really interesting. If you study the popularity of the biggest TV shows in Poland over the last few years, I don't think there are probably much less than 50 shows in a year that gathered an audience of 5 million or plus 5 million. So compare that. Whereas the biggest vlogger in the world comes from Sweden, 112 million subscribers. 112, like Poland times 3 almost, right? So that's the number of subscribers for a person who lives, I'm not sure if he still lives in Sweden, but I will give you a very interesting comparative example. I remember once on International Women's Day, Janusz Korwin-Mikke gave an interview to Good Morning Britain, which is an ITV format in Britain. And it was run by Susanna and Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan lost his job on ITV, Good Morning Britain, for interesting reasons since then. But he, as an example, he's important here because he, before that or during this career as a TV host, he was also one of the jury members during the talent shows in America and in Britain, I suppose, as well. And Janusz Korwin-Mikke was invited for a short interview on International Women's Day. And after this interview, the Good Morning Britain, this interview was published. It was very controversial, very funny also, very controversial. And it got posted on the YouTube channel of Good Morning Britain. And there were probably around 800,000 views. And even Annie Lennox talked about it during another episode of Good Morning Britain. But the moment this most popular vlogger noticed this story and did his own episode, PewDiePie's episode about Janusz Korwin-Mikke had 8 million views. So compare that. You have one person, maybe a couple of collaborators, people who support you, preparing each and every episode. And on the other hand, you have a long-standing television format with tradition, with lots of guests on a daily basis, and it can only reach as many as 800. So it's basically 10% of what one person in his living room, without studio equipment and the entire team of professional TV team can do. So I suppose it says a lot.
So I wish you luck in your career as a YouTuber and also in your professional career. So thanks for your time, Łukasz, and speak to you soon.
Thank you very much, David. It was a pleasure.